I'm gonna give you guys some workouts, some really easy workouts, simple workouts, workouts that don't need too much equipment or outside of the realm of just a barbell and a band or whatever, or just a mechanism to help peak your strength. This is one of my specialties. This is one of the things that I've thrived as a coach. What a lot of people come to me for is how to peak them properly for competition, not to hit their numbers, their big numbers and PRs in competition or in like their training sessions, but how to hit it on game day. So if you don't know anything about peaking, the biggest thing is that you don't want to peak early. You don't want to peak too late. You want to peak perfectly. This is what makes my job so hard, and what makes great coaches thrive in this industry is learning how to perfectly peak someone on one day so that any other day of the year, they wouldn't be able to hit those numbers, but they will hit them on this day. And after that, not until they're peaked again will they be able to hit that number or higher than that number. Okay, so just a little background on just my personal training from what I've hit in training to what I've hit in competition. So my highest deadlift in training is 800. So this one is going to be off. So it's 800, and this was after I competed my last time. So I had a 800-pound deadlift in the gym. But prior to that, my highest PR, and it was a competition PR, was 782. My training PR before I hit that in competition was 765. So you should never be hitting numbers in competition that you've hit in training, or I mean vice versa. So like you don't want to hit those bigger numbers in training, then walk onto the platform and then just lay an egg and then just don't hit those numbers unless you're training specifically to overreach during training so that you can be tentative during your competition. That I've seen that method, and I've seen a lot of people be successful like that. But my specific training style is peaking somebody for the exact day so they're not hitting PRs or huge numbers before they walk on the platform. Those days and that energy should be saved for the platform. So my deadlift is a little higher than my competition, but that's just because I haven't competed in a long time. My squat is in competition was a 755 sleeves, and my previous sleeve squat before competition was 720. So that's around a 40-pound jump once I went to competition, once I was peaked out. For bench press, my best on bench press, and this also happened after my competing, I did 500 pounds for 2 reps on bench press. My highest comp bench is 485 or 487 or something like that, whatever the kilos is. With bench press is a little bit different too. Usually you are gonna have to hit the numbers bigger in training than when you go into competition. It's just one of those lifts that you get very fatigued from squats. So then you're gonna walk into comp, usually not hit the same numbers as what you were hitting in training. So you have to keep that in mind once you're going to a comp. So you can see, I cater myself in my training to be strong in training, but to build, to pack the clay on, so that when I go to compete, I'm going to be hitting numbers that I didn't think I was capable of hitting, or numbers that I anticipated to hit it for competition, for PRs, but I haven't hit in training. That to me is the perfect, well-rounded training cycle. You're eliminating a lot of the possibilities of injury. You're more injury prone if you're actually trying to peak in training and hitting the big numbers in training. And I've seen that 100 times, thousands of times, that people walk into training after they hit those big PRs, and they're usually like 1 week peaked out too early. So their week before they go to their competition, they hit these certain numbers, and then once they go to the comp, those numbers are just not there anymore. Or vice versa, the people hit the numbers in training, and then they go max out the week after their training or their competition, and they hit numbers that they've never hit before, so they're too late on their peaking. So you have to be able to analyze your training cycle to how you did in training to competition. How did that transfer over? And that's how you learn how to specifically peak for yourself. But I'm gonna give you 2 or 3 exercises per compound lift that are gonna help you propel you into peaking your strength. These are kind of like my secret workouts. So this video is like, oh, I'm like giving my secrets of a coach, but not really, because the intellectual properties in the intensities and the rep schemes, and these are not new workouts, but people, they use them every single day, but it's the way I feel I use them, which makes me better than the next coach. The way that I look at overload training, so this is what it will be, they're all overload workouts. Overload training is the acronym or the metaphor I like to use is like, if you've ever seen Fast and the Furious and what's his name, Dom is racing Paul Walker. I forgot what Paul Walker's name was in the movie. or Brian, right? So his name is Brian in the movie. So they're racing, and then they're doing a quarter-mile race, and then they get halfway through, and then Brian hits the nods. Boom, he takes off. And then Dom smiles because he knows you're doing it too early. That's an immature move on like a very immature racer. And I look at that like lifters, that's an immature lifter thing to want to push it hard during training, early in training. Then I'm peaking early. Old veteran lifters will wait. They'll keep waiting until the moment is perfect to throw in the overload, to throw in the certain intensities, to back off peaking wise, because that's what propels you into the finish line. So if you remember that scene, Paul Walker takes off and he's like way ahead and he's getting all hyped up, celebrating. Oh yeah, beat Dom, whatever. Then Dom's smiling, and then he just hits his nose the last like bit of that race, and he just zooms right past him, boom. And so that's the metaphor I like to use for overload. You have to know your timing. Timing is everything in training. When do I pull back on volume? When do I push the intensity? When do I throw the certain stimulus to the workouts in order for me to shock my central nervous system to know it's time to grow, it's time to change, and it's time to get better, and time to get stronger. So let me go over the bench press first, because seems like it's the one that everybody loves to talk about. And I have 3 workouts, and these ones never fail. These are the same 3 I use for everybody's peaking, but I will differ in how they're feeling fatigue-wise, because each one of them adds a bigger fatigue stimulus, but some of them will take down the fatigue, the chance of injury, if someone is kind of overreaching or kind of overtraining in that sense, and then they're telling me they're fatigued, their joints are messed up, they can't sleep right, whatever. All signs of overtraining. So for bench press, first thing is a slingshot bench, or a mechanism like the slingshot bench. So, obviously they have that little mechanism that comes across your chest or on your arms, and then when you come down, it takes the load off as you come down. So there's a progressive overload and underload. So as I'm coming down, I'm underloading that weight, and then there's a progressive overload as I press out. So that means that you can handle a higher intensity with the same movement in the same exact technique. So this is optimal. Slingshot and the next workout, which is a reverse band bench press, are the very optimal lifts that you want to do, because you'll be able to manage a higher intensity or a much larger load, but you don't have to change your technique in order to do it. So the next one is static hold. So reverse bands first is just basically you just take like rubber bands or like the kind of like athletic bands, and then you loop them around the top of a squat rack, around the barbell, and then you're in the rack. As you come down, same concept. It's a underload on the way down, progressive overload on the way up as you press. So the technique doesn't change at all. The bar path doesn't change at all, but you're actually just being able to handle more load, causes more muscle engagement, more activation, and then that's what causes that central nervous system to want to get stronger in order to adapt to whatever load and intensity that you're doing for it. So, and the last one is the static holds. So this is one of my favorite ones if I have an athlete that's been overtrained, or they're way too fatigued, they can't handle, or they're failing a lot of the reverse band bench presses and the slingshot bench press. This is one of my favorite ones to go to save their body. It's a static hold. It's the most simplest thing in the world, and most people look at you like you're dumb when you're doing it, but there's a real reason to do it, and there's a real huge stimulus that your body will adapt to just to get better at it. So all you're doing literally is putting on like 130 to 150% of what your 1 rep max is on bench press. So say if my bench was 500 pounds, so it used to be my old max, I would go 550 to 600 pounds for sets of just literally someone unracking it for me, and then me getting into my bench press position and holding it for 12 to 15 seconds. And the reason, if you ask what's the reasoning for 12 to 15 seconds, if I look at in a competition, what is the duration of one solid rep? What's the max amount of time I'm going to have a weight in my hand in competition for during the command? So that start, press, rack, it's around 12 seconds. And that's like the worst case scenario if you have a shitty judge and they're giving you a long press command, or if you're struggling and you're really grinding it out. So we want to have that work capacity for the whole amount of reps. So I'm literally taking that 550 to 600 pounds and I'm just holding it. And I'm holding it like this for 12 seconds, and all I do is rack it. You're gonna do 3 sets to 12 to 15 seconds of that. Max usually should be around 12 seconds, and you'll be blown away by how much that will actually help your strength go. When I had Bruce really honing in on his bench press, and when he hit 640 on bench press, I had him doing static holds with about 750 pounds at the end of his workouts, after the end of his working sets. And obviously, you know how that he did really well. I think he might have broken a few state records or whatever. Okay, so back squats, same concept. I want to keep the exact movement, exact bar path the same, but I want to up the intensity and have a mechanism there that will allow me to do so without any risk of injury or an increased risk of injury, and it's not going to change my bar path or my technique position. All right, so the first one will be reverse band squats. The same exact thing as like the reverse band bench press, but now you put it on a squat bar. Same thing, when you come down, your technique on squats will be exactly the same, but there will be a progressive underload as you come down. So your weight will be the least amount on your back in the bottom position. Those bands will be pulling up on the weight, and you guys know gravity, that's going to be decreasing the weight on your back. But as you go up, it's going to be a progressive overload. Now your central nervous system knows it needs to activate at a higher rate. I need to get stronger. I need to really hone in on my strength just to adapt to this stimulus, okay? The next one is barbell walkouts. This is almost exactly the same as the static holds. I'm gonna put on 120 to 150% of my 1 rep max. So my max squat, so I'll use an example for my wrap squats. My highest wrap squat is 815. If I was doing a wrapped competition for my stimulus for this, I most likely wouldn't be using reverse band squats because I'm already getting the overload from when I'm using the wraps. So I'm almost putting too much overload on my body, and usually I haven't seen any huge transfers in terms of how I've peaked people when I use reverse band squats on wrapped athletes. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just basically just gonna pick up the weight and just walk it back. I don't need any bands, anything like that. So if I take an 815 squat, or I'm looking to hit an 815 squat in competition, I'm gonna take 860 to 900 pounds on my back and walking it out. You literally just walk it back. Make sure that you know how to properly set your feet up in your squat. And when you're a wrap squatter, it's really dire that you know how to set your feet up, because you're usually managing weight that you couldn't do with sleeves on. And when you have the wraps on, you're on your knees and it hurts like a bitch, it's hard to set yourself in a position. So you have to stay calm. You have to be able to know exactly that you're gonna put yourself in a perfect position to perform a perfect squat. I see a lot of young lifters rush, especially because they know it hurts their fucking knees. Like I've wrapped people so tight that their knees bleed. So when they're walking up to the platform, the one cue I give them right before they walk up and put their back on the bar is take your time. You have fucking time. You have usually at least 1 minute to walk up to the barbell, set yourself, set your feet, look up for a squat command. So take your time. It's not that important to rush through it. Nobody's rushing you unless you have a shitty coach who wrapped your knees and wasn't able to time it correctly. Okay, so take your time. The barbell walkouts will perfect this part. Now you're handling a higher intensity on your back. Now when you walk into competition, you're handling loads that are 100 pounds less than what you did in training. So we train harder in training, or we do things that we're not able to do in competition, so that when competition comes or wartime comes when it's under the barbell, I'm more ready already because I've already adapted that stimulus. Now all I have to do is squat it. All right, the third one, this is my least favorite in squats in terms of overload, is box squats. This one is my least favorite because it's taught to reach the hips back, rock back on the bottom of the box, and to lean forward coming off the box, which it's a good tool in the off season. I'm not gonna knock it because it's a big conjugate West Side thing, but that rock and then the reaching back to sit back, you're changing your whole bar path. You're changing your technique. Nobody squats like that. Nobody comes down to the bottom of the squat and rocks back to rock forward. And if you do, you're gonna fucking kill yourself, especially if you're handling high loads of weight. So I only use box squats. One, if someone's injured, if they have knee problems, hip problems, back problems, whatever the case may be, I'm going to use box squats with them because I'm taking off the chance of injury. So I'm decreasing the chance of injury when I use box squats. There's a mechanism there to make sure that I'm not going to a position that I'm putting myself at risk once I get there. But like I said, you want to more so lean towards the things that I can do that don't change my technique at all, so I can work and be technically sound over this duration of having to put higher loads on my body, bigger intensities. So I don't know if you guys know anything about muscle memory or mastering an art. It takes 500 repetitions for you to become muscle memory in anything. So if I were to take this pen and I would just go like this, for muscle memory to remember to do this properly, I have to do this 500 times. Now, if I want to become a master of this specific technique, I have to do this 10,000 times. Okay, so if we're constantly changing the variance in our technique, rocking back, rocking forward, doing things that aren't exactly the same movement every single time, you're not going to master the art. You're not going to become muscle memory in terms of your technique and your bar path, all right? So box squats, last resort, but I still do use them. Another side one on that is Hatfield Squats. If you don't know what Hatfield Squats is, it's basically a safety squat bar with a barbell in front of you, anchored on the rack, holding it, and then letting your squat be assisted by you actually squatting down with your hands on the bar. So you can do upwards towards 150 to 200% of what your 1 rep max is. So I've done a 900 pound Hatfield squat. I've almost reached 1,000 pounds on a Hatfield squat, and I squatted 800 pounds in sleeves or reps. So those are all 3 to 4 tools right there on squats that you could use. For deadlifts is already, in your body's sense of mind, an overload. It engages every single muscle group, and the intensity is so high that you usually don't have to use a higher stimulus in order to try and amp that central nervous system to a point that you are forcing strength and forcing styles, whatever you're looking for. But the 2 things that people do use, and the things that I do use, but I'm very cautious, because there's a thin line on deadlifts, that because your body takes so much energy to perform the lift, that you can throw yourself into overtraining very quickly. And if you don't know anything overtraining, it's a real thing. I love CT Fletcher, that's Pops. But overtraining is a real thing. Science shows it, and it becomes detrimental for your body, especially if you're a strength athlete. So those things usually come from when I'm doing full compound lifts at a high intensity at way too many frequencies a week. All right, so reverse band deadlifts is the highest turnover, I think, in my mind as a coach, and I'm doing this a long time, at the highest level for competition or to peak your strength. Even if you're not doing competition, maybe you want to just do a 4-week block and then just kill that shit, and then jump your maxes up 50 to 60, 70 pounds, depending on where you are, like athletic-wise in terms of your training age. Obviously, when you're younger in training age, you are going to have huger jumps. When we're back on the back end, older lifters, now 5-10 pounds means a lot more to us than when it did when we first started, okay? So reverse band deadlifts is the number one thing I'll use in terms of peaking someone's deadlift. I'm very cautious. I'll do this every other week while I'm peaking in that last 4 to 6 weeks. But you're basically just putting the barbell in a squat rack or some type of rack. The bands hang down to the barbell, and then there's a progressive overload as you come up. So it's backwards, obviously, since the barbell's on the floor now. It's lighter at the bottom, so you're able to handle more weight coming off the floor, and that progressive overload comes up into my lockout. So I'm using the hamstrings, glutes, and the upper back to lock out better at the top, okay? It doesn't change the technique again. So exactly the same. So I'm chipping away at the 500 reps for muscle memory, or the 10,000 reps for the mastering of the art of whatever you're doing. So the secondary thing that you can do, and the thing that I usually don't like to program, but I will if I have to, is rack pull. So if I have someone that has an injury again, that they can't squat all the way down into the proper deadlift form, I will have them do or if they're a sumo deadlifter, I will work rack pulls more with sumo deadlifts. So when I had Pitt hitting like mid 7s, I would have him do more rack pulls than reverse band, just because I found these sticking points that he wasn't able to technically get through. So it was a technique thing a lot with him and his body position. So if I see a problem in a mid part of a deadlift or a sumo deadlift, I will go to that exact point, or I will pause it there, or do like double pause, whatever, and I will force that athlete into a power position, a more powerful position for them to feel the power, and then we'll switch back over to the full range of motion lift. So the rack pulls, so that those are very secondary if I use them at all. Okay, so we'll just go over quickly over the 3 compound lifts and the lifts for them again. So the bench press, we have the slingshot, we have the reverse band bench press, and then we have the static holds. All 3 work very well, but you always want to stick with the things that are always chipping away at mastering the art of whatever movement you're doing. Back squats, reverse band squats, barbell walkouts, which are usually my favorites, and then box squats as that last case scenario if you just can't do any of the other ones. And then the deadlifts is reverse band deadlifts, and then rack pulls being the last case resort too. Hopefully all of these help. These are all literally tools that I still use today for my world record holders, my state record holders, whatever, my highest amount of athletes to my lowest set of athletes. I use this less with the beginner athletes or the ones that are younger in their training years, But as you work along, you'll be able to see which one actually propels your strength opposed to hindering it or overworking you, whatever. It's an art to know and see an athlete when they're fatiguing, how they're fatiguing, how do I work around that fatigue? And all of these workouts will optimize strength gains, the work, the amount of work, the intensity, while putting them at a decreased risk of injury and overtraining. So I hope these help. Comment below if you have any more questions about these lifts. I'm just an encyclopedia now. I just want to help out as many people as possible. And I know this is one thing that people struggle with. And a lot of reasons why people leave their coaches and come to me is because I hit all these big numbers in training, and then I went to competition, I laid a fucking egg. I bombed out. I didn't do very well. I didn't hit the numbers at all that I hit in training. So do these workouts on that last bit apart, that 4 to 6 weeks, and learn how to do linear progression properly. How do I increase the intensity while dropping that load and volume? And then adding a stimulus in for my NOS, like for Dom and Brian, the NOS that propels me through the finish line opposed to me slowing down as I'm finishing the race, all right?